One thing I've always felt was a massive missed opportunity in the Dead Space franchise is the fact that it never fully explored the idea of reanimated flesh being fused with steel and machinery in a true, sustained way. We got pure body horror, we got twisted corpses, we got bone blades and exposed muscle, but we never really got the next logical step of the Red Marker's influence, the direct hijacking of human technology through corrupted flesh. Enemies that aren't just dead, but fully industrialized. And when you look at something like the biobots in the Callisto Protocol, it becomes painfully clear how hard that concept could have hit in Dead Space. Because when you really think about what the Red Marker actually does, it doesn't just reanimate tissue. It broadcasts a signal that reorganizes matter with purpose. It reshapes bone. It repurposes organs. It rewrites biology into weaponized form. So the idea that it wouldn't also use technology attached to the body at the moment of death honestly feels like a missed logical conclusion. In a universe saturated with cybernetics, mining rigs, prosthetics, implant tech, and powered suits, the Red Marker could have very easily spread through living flesh directly into machinery and hijacked it from the inside. And that's where the real horror should have escalated. Think about it. The marker wouldn't need to infect machines the way it infects biology. It could simply use corrupted tissue as a bridge, flesh growing into servo joints, tendons wrapping around pistons, nervous systems threading into wiring harnesses. The body becomes the interface. The technology becomes the weapon. The marker doesn't just reanimate the dead, it appropriates everything the dead were plugged into. That's where biomechanical necromorphs should have come from. Imagine necromorphs still fused into mining exosuits, the Red Marker using the suit's hydraulic systems to amplify their strength. Security officers resurrected inside riot armor, their flesh rupturing through cracked plating while the suit's power systems keep them moving long after the body should have failed. Surgeons reanimated while still wired into automated medical rigs, turned into walking flesh machines that attack with surgical tools driven by corrupted software. Maintenance workers still grafted into wall-mounted machinery, becoming stationary flesh turrets wired directly into ship systems. These wouldn't just be monsters. They'd be technology that the Red Marker learned how to pilot through meat. From a gameplay standpoint, this would have taken Dead Space combat to an entirely new level. You wouldn't always be able to just slice bone. Some limbs would be metal, some would spark when damaged. Some wouldn't sever at all until you overloaded circuits, froze hydraulics with stasis, or tore power conduits out with kinesis. Every encounter would become part body horror, part industrial sabotage. And narratively, this would have expanded the marker's threat far beyond biology. Because at that point, the horror is no longer just the dead are walking. The horror becomes everything we built can walk too. Biomechanical necromorphs would mean that no amount of human progress is safe from corruption. Technology isn't a defense against the marker. It's just more raw material. The Red Marker wouldn't just be remaking corpses, it would be assimilating an entire industrial civilization, flesh and machine together, into one continuous organism. It also would have opened the door to far darker lore. EarthGov attempting to deliberately fuse necromorph tissue with combat frames to create controlled biomechanical soldiers. Unitologists willingly grafting flesh into machines as an act of worship, believing steel is just another holy extension of the body. Military recovery teams keeping dead soldiers operational through mechanical reinforcement, not to save them, but to reuse them. And to me, that fits Dead Space perfectly. Because the franchise was never just about monsters. It was about human desperation, secrecy, and technological arrogance feeding the apocalypse louder and faster than the markers ever could alone. Biomechanical necromorphs would have been the ultimate visual symbol of that corpses turned into tools, then turned into infrastructure, then turned into weapons. Now, I understand why Dead Space never fully crossed into that territory. The series built its core identity around strategic dismemberment of flesh. Metal complicates that system. You can't treat hydraulics like tendons. You can't plasma cut a piston the same way you cut bone. It would have required deeper combat redesign. But that's exactly why it would have pushed the franchise forward instead of just sideways. Instead of refining the same biological horror loop, biomechanical necromorphs would have represented a true evolutionary phase of the outbreak, the Red Marker learning, adapting. Realizing that human technology is just another limb it can grow into, in my opinion, Dead Space stayed pure in its monster design, but that purity came at the cost of evolution. The setting was ready for flesh and steel abominations. The logic of the Red Marker supported it. The industrial environments begged for it. And when the Callisto Protocol finally gave us enemies like the Biobots, it just made the absence in Dead Space feel even louder. Because the most terrifying version of the Necromorph apocalypse isn't just the dead coming back to life. It's the idea that the Red Marker didn't just resurrect humanity. It retooled it. And once you take that idea one step further, the existence of the Brethren Moons suddenly becomes even more disturbing. Because if the Red Marker can hijack technology through corrupted flesh on a local scale, through suits, implants, machinery, and infrastructure, then the Brethren Moons themselves start to look less like living gods and more like the final industrial form of that same process. Not just biological convergence, but planetary scale biomechanical manufacturing. Think about how a moon is made. Entire civilizations are harvested, biomass is broken down, reassembled, compressed, and reforged into a single colossal entity. That process is already mechanical in nature, even if it looks organic on the surface. It's mass production, it's assembly, it's planetary scale resource extraction. The only difference is that the factory is alive. Now imagine if the Red Marker doesn't just use flesh as its raw material, but also absorbs all the technology of the civilizations it consumes into that process. Starships, cities, power grids, industrial complexes. All of it reduced, stripped down, and reconstituted through corrupted biomass. At that point, a Brethren Moon wouldn't just be biological. It would be the ultimate flesh machine. A moon-sized fusion of dead civilizations, bone, steel, infrastructure, and signal architecture all folded into one functioning superorganism. The Red Marker wouldn't just be creating monsters, it would be running the largest automated manufacturing system in the universe, where worlds themselves are fed into an assembly line and emerge as weapons. And that reframes the entire Necromorph outbreak as an industrial supply chain. Necromorphs become the harvesters. Biomechanical necromorphs become the processors. Brethren Moons become the final product. Every outbreak is just another production cycle. Every dead world is just another factory floor successfully processed. And when you view it like that, the horror becomes way colder than simple body horror. The Red Marker stops feeling like a supernatural curse and starts feeling like a self-replicating cosmic industry, endlessly converting civilizations into components for something larger than comprehension. It also explains why the marker signal is so rigid, so repetitive, so structured. It doesn't behave like a chaotic force. It behaves like an automated system following an ancient industrial directive. Harvest, convert, assemble, launch, repeat. And this is where the biomechanical necromorph concept would have truly completed the picture. Because once flesh and steel begin to merge at the small scale inside suits, rigs, and human infrastructure, it's only logical that the same hybridization would scale all the way up into the Brethren Moons themselves. The moons wouldn't just be living masses of dead tissue, they would be the final machines built from dead civilizations. And that, to me, is where Dead Space could have crossed from cosmic horror into something even worse. Cosmic industrial horror. Not we are being hunted by monsters, but we are being processed. At that point, humanity isn't fighting an enemy. Humanity is just raw material in a universal factory that never shuts down. And that's the version of the Brethren Moons that genuinely terrifies me, not as gods, but as the last product of an extinction industry that has never stopped running. And when I step back and look at all of this together, the markers, the necromorphs, the failed attempts at control, the flesh merging with steel, and the Brethren Moons as the final industrial form of the process, it stops feeling like a story about monsters. It starts to feel like a story about systems, about what happens when intelligence builds something so efficient, so absolute, that it no longer needs intention, morality, or even purpose to keep going. The Red Marker doesn't hate, it doesn't judge, it doesn't crave, it just executes. Harvest, convert, assemble, repeat. And humanity, thinking it was studying a god, was really just standing inside a machine. What makes Dead Space truly horrifying to me isn't that the dead come back to life. It's that once the process starts, nothing in the universe matters as an individual anymore. Not bodies, not cities, not civilizations. Everything becomes input. Everything becomes material. Everything becomes part of a larger function that no one remembers creating. Necromorphs aren't monsters in the traditional sense. They're just the visible gears of a system too large to comprehend. And the Brethren Moons aren't rulers of that system. They're the final products rolling off the assembly line. And then there's Isaac. Isaac Clarke isn't terrifying because he's strong. He's terrifying because he's the one person who can see the machine from the inside and still remain human, at least for a while. He's not a chosen one. He's an accidental interface. A living diagnostic tool inside a cosmic factory that has no shutdown command. And that's the cruelest part of all of it. The universe of Dead Space doesn't end because evil wins. It ends because the process works. Civilizations rise. They build. They expand. They experiment. They discover the markers. They try to control them. They try to weaponize them. They try to save themselves with the very thing that dooms them. And the machine simply adapts and keeps running. In the end, Dead Space isn't really about survival horror. It's about the terror of realizing that the universe doesn't need monsters to end you. It only needs infrastructure. And the moment humanity tried to turn the apocalypse into a tool, it didn't become the master of the system. It simply proved that it was already part of it.